Hello, and welcome back to the AGF Design Studio channel. My name is Alana. I'm a freelance lettering artist and designer, and today's video is going to be all about Adobe Fresco for beginners. If you've been wondering about the program and wanting to try it out, we're going to be diving deep into the program. So sit back, relax, grab your iPad, and let's jump in. When you first open the app, you'll see a few key tabs on the left-hand side. So we start with Home. This is where your most recent files live, so you can see those pretty readily. You've got little icons here for starting a new document, and you can tap into the new and upcoming features and see what they've been working on in the app and things to come. Under Learn, it's a really great section. If you watch this video and then you just completely forget everything, you could always rewatch this video, or you could jump into their hands-on tutorials within the app. It's really cool because in addition to giving a tour of the app itself, you also get to learn about the specific tools and their functions. It's also a great place to explore the YouTube tutorials that exist on platforms like Adobe Live channel on YouTube and different ways that you can create in the Fresco app. On the Discover tab, you'll see a lot of different artists using Adobe Fresco in past Adobe live streams. You could load those and check those out. A lot of great inspiring things being created all the time. And you'll also see the latest Behance projects using Adobe Fresco populate in this section as well. So it's a really great community to be a part of. It's really cool to see how popular the app has grown over the years since it debuted in 2019. So definitely great to check it out. Then you'll have the Files section. You'll start with your files. I like to try and keep things organized. I know for my home screen, it didn't look very organized, but this view is my preferred view. If you want to organize your work, this is where you can do it. Just tap New Folder, give it a name, and hit Save. Now I've got mine organized by name in alphabetical order, but you can also organize by date modified, date created, and by name. To further organize your work, you can hit the handy Select tool and start checking things off. And then at the bottom here, you'll see options for Move to, Copy to, or Delete. Choose wisely. But it makes it easy to move folders, move files into different folders, move folders within other folders. So you'll see you have a lot of flexibility and a lot of versatility for how you can organize your files in the app. You can also change to a list view if you prefer that, as opposed to a grid view. Under this section will be your shared cloud documents. So this is if any of your files have any collaborative features with people. If you shared it with someone's email, those shared cloud documents will populate here. And then, of course, we have the deleted section. And it'll say here clearly, files you delete will be permanently removed after 30 days. So it's nice that you have a little bit of buffer time just in case you accidentally deleted something. You don't have to freak out and worry. It'll be in your deleted section, in which case you can hit the three-dot icon here and select Restore, or you can permanently delete it. Note, once you hit permanently delete, it is not recoverable from there. So choose wisely, and you've definitely been warned. If we want to jump into creating, we've got a few options here. Here, we can tap Create New, and this will come up with all of our different categories and different sizes of documents that we can start with. Recent is where, as it sounds, your most recently used dimensions and file types will be stored. Any of your saved configurations will be in this category. And then you have digital, print, and social. Social is a newer category, and it's a great addition because you've got things like Instagram posts for both portrait and for stories, which is great. You've got common configurations for print, so letter size, A4, and then digital, of course. Depending on your iPad, you'll have the current screen size as well as other dimensions. If none of these suit what you're trying to create, you can always just hit an arrow on one of these files and hit New Size from Format. From here, you can change things like your unit, so there's pixels, inches, centimeters, and millimeters. And then you've got your width and your height. Tapping this small lock here will make sure that your dimensions stay proportional to the original input that you had. And if you hit unlock and just tap it and it sort of unlocks like that, you'll be able to configure these in whatever dimensions you like independently of one another. Here's your print size. So PPI, points per inch, or they have points per centimeter. Depending on what you want to create, you might want to bump this up closer to 300, especially if you want something that is going to print well and in high quality. And you can decide whether or not to start with a white background or a transparent one. If you're satisfied with this, you can select Save This Size, and then rename it to something that'll help you find it later when it populates in your Save section. You also have the option to import and open Photoshop files. Thanks to the function of the program, documents that you open in Photoshop will populate into your Fresco, and vice versa. Keep that in mind that Photoshop and Fresco really work hand in hand and they work really well together. Now that we've got the basic lay of the land here, let's jump into one of my previous files and take a look at our tools. Starting in the top left-hand corner, we've got our brushes. In Fresco, you'll find that you have 3 different brush types: pixel brushes, live brushes, and vector brushes. Pixel brushes are great because they've got a lot of versatility, a lot of great texture, and the pixel brush category does offer the most amount of brushes. We've got basic, charcoal, comics, and it goes down a whole list. The numbers that you see here are the quantity of brushes included in each section. And anything is easy to start using. It's as simple as just tapping and clicking and starting to draw. You'll also notice in your pixel brushes category that you can add brushes. You can just tap at the bottom here and select Discover New Brushes. And as you can see, I haven't even added all of them yet, so let's add the rest that I'm missing. And then once we add them, we can hit Done. And then any brushes that you've added will be found under a category called Library Brushes. So this is where any of those extra brush packs will be added. You can also add your own brushes from files. So Fresco can read Photoshop ABR brush file types. So it's pretty cool. Next, let's take a look at our live brushes. Now, on its face, live brushes only have 2 categories, but live brushes are super cool. You've got your choice of watercolor and oil. So these are painting brushes. And what makes these brushes so unique and so cool is how well they render on the screen. I mean, it's hard to say that this doesn't look like actual, real, wet watercolor paint. It's pretty insane. And the way that it interacts with existing colors, it's extremely sophisticated and very, very cool. You can expect the same level of sophistication with the oil brushes. And you'll see you have this paint mix tool as well. Lets you control how much you mix colors together and the level of texture that you get in there as well is pretty sick. And then last but not least, we've got our vector brushes. A few more categories here. So basic, jitter, manga, and outline. So this is a pretty unique feature because most digital drawing apps for the iPad do not have vector support. So it's nice to see vector getting some shine as well. As interesting and crazy as that might look, it's infinitely scalable, high quality vector stroke right there. Which means that Fresco is also compatible with Adobe Illustrator. So it's got a lot going for it in just 3 different brush types. I like the jitter brushes as well because you have this sort of sleek look to a basic brush in the basic brush category for vectors, but you can also have that textured personality still within your vector artwork, which I think is a really nice feature to see. And just in a few strokes, you get a lot of personality, which I think is really cool. To adjust my brush size, we've got our brush settings at the bottom here. Grabbing this gray bar here is something that you can move this toolbar anywhere on your screen where you feel comfortable. I like to keep mine nestled on the little toolbar here, but this number represents our brush size and can be slid up and down to adjust its size to be large or as small as it goes. In the middle here, you'll have your flow. So you can think of this as the amount of paint or texture that's on your brush. So you can see the difference between this one and this one. If I increase my flow, the strokes are much darker and deeper with more of that texture and information on it. And then this little squiggle here, we've got our smoothing tool. This is a feature that is also controlled by a slider, and that just controls how much control you have over your strokes. So you'll find that a smoothing setting of 100 feels very stiff as opposed to a smoothing of 10. It feels very loose. Your strokes will probably have a lot more character and personality the lower the smoothing you have set. So let's talk about brush management. If I go to my pixel brush category, for example, I'll see a few things. One, if I enter any category, I can select my brush, and you'll see that there are stars next to these different brushes. If it's hollow, it means that it hasn't been favorited yet. But if I really like this brush, I can just tap that star, and it'll instantly populate into my favorite section. By default, it'll populate to the bottom of the list. But as I've been working in Fresco, I've populated a lot of favorited brushes here. So what more can we do to organize this? Let's say I really like this brush and I want to make sure it's highly visible and I can reach it easily without having to scroll all the way to the bottom. I can just tap and hold this with my other finger. Give it that first slot. The same thing can be done with multiple brushes at once. So I'm just going to tap, and like I'm going to drag it, and then I'll just start tapping maybe a few other brushes that I want to reorganize a bit. And then I can scroll up or scroll down and put those brushes right where I like them. How else can we manage our brushes? We can go to the 3-dot icon at the very top here, go Manage Pixel Brushes, and as simple as toggling on and off different sections, we can eliminate temporarily certain categories of brushes that we know we'll never use or we rarely use. You can just toggle anything on and off and then hit done. And then you'll see you've got only the ones that you want visible. Next, let's check out our eraser tool. Much like the name implies, you use it to erase. Much like your brushes, the size of your eraser can be adjusted with the slider. You can also select different kinds of erasers, so similar to picking a different brush. So you'll see that if you select a different kind of eraser type, you'll get a different kind of effect from erasing. Next, we have our smudge tool. Similar to Photoshop, you have smudged brushes as well. Similar to our eraser and our other brushes, you have smudge brushes that can have certain properties, so sort of creating an interesting layered effect just by how you want to smudge. Next, we have our transform tool. So I've got the little party hat selected here. And the transform tool is what allows me to move this around This straight line that's going up from the bounding box is for rotation. And then on the left-hand side, you'll see other different ways that you can transform and manipulate objects. So we've got skew. So that's like moving things on interesting angles. Got distort. Can really crunch and smush stuff. Could use the perspective tool. And then you have the liquefy tools. You have 7 different types of liquefy tools in here. You've got warping here, and sort of transform something by dragging your cursor over it. Let's say I warped something. I want to reconstruct it a bit. It can help smooth things out. You can twirl objects just by tapping and holding. You've got pucker, which as it sounds, sort of shrinks things in around a singular point. So wherever you put your cursor, that'll shrink in. And similarly, bloat will enlarge around a singular point. Then you've got push left, which sort of feels like a funhouse mirror effect a little bit. You'll also notice in the transform tool, you've got little toggle here. These 4 arrows can be used for precise movements, up, down, left, or right, which is great if you really want extremely controlled movements, pixel by pixel. You also have access to flipping horizontally or vertically in just a tap. If you press and hold, you'll see that you have access to all different kinds of selection tools. Again, similar to the ones that you'd find in Photoshop. So let's start with lasso. That's the first one, and that's the one that I definitely use the most often. So from here, you can transform, you can move things around. Just use it to isolate specific parts of your canvas and part of your drawing that you want to focus on. From here, you can one-tap erase something. You can also use it to mask an area. So let's say I want to reveal part of this. If I swipe against this, you'll see that it's got sort of this interesting texture based on the mask that I had applied. You can also deselect if you didn't exactly get the kind of selection that you want. You can just tap deselect, or you can select more. This will change some settings for you, the way things are displayed. And you can also edit your selection further here as well. A lot of it comes down to your personal preference and the way that you like to do things. Next in our selection tool, we have our magic wand. With our magic wand, we are making a selection, and it's just another way of isolating objects and anything that's on your canvas. It's a way that you can recolor something. You can isolate this around the magic wand selection that you've made. You can also, again, erase. And I can adjust the sensitivity to that color by adjusting my color margin. Next, we've got paint selection. So this is more of a free-form way of selecting things. Really just make larger selections. I can also just adjust my brush size here as well. And you'll notice that as you pass, this will all become part of one selection as you pass the stylus over those selection areas. So just know that all of them are getting grouped together now. And the next, rectangle, ellipse, and polygon are really handy because sometimes you just want a normal shape. Sometimes you just want to select a normal shape, or essentially using that as like creating a shape. So you've got rectangle, you've got ellipse. And to strain the proportion of the shapes that you're creating with these selections, you can just tap and hold the touch shortcut and you'll see that constrained proportions comes up. We'll be seeing the touch shortcut in this tutorial as well, so stay tuned for that. And then of course the polygon tool is great because not only can you create triangles, but you can increase the sides. Next we have our fill tool. So fill tool we'll take a look at now, and we'll see it again later once we go into coloring section, but fill tool is pretty self-explanatory. Like in most apps, you can just tap to flood any area with color. This is pretty much universal for closed objects, so things that have complete bounds and don't have any gaps in them will be flooded with whatever color you choose. Similarly, I can also isolate these white areas and fill those with a different color from the line work that I have. You can also just use it to fill the background color, for example, in just a simple tap. Now, the cool thing also about the fill tool is that you've got a color margin. So looking at our color margin, I want to, let's say, fill this with some color. I've got this little confetti piece. My color margin is currently set at 0. The cool thing about this is that it's dynamic. So as I slide up, it'll start to fill in more completely and leave less bare pixels. I usually like to adjust my color margin as needed. Sometimes I don't need it all the way up to 255, but it is an option for whenever you're filling in objects. Further exploring our fill settings, if I want to change the color of this area, which isn't a completely opaque and dark area, but I want to maintain the quality of that sort of semi-translucent section while just only editing the color, I will preserve the transparency to keep that quality while only affecting the color. So as you can see, I can just reassign that to a different color. If I had that unchecked, for example, you can see that it makes it a dark, blotchy spot, which I don't like, so preserving transparency is good for that. Then, if I don't have contiguous selected, for example, all of the available to select objects on my layer that match the same color of the object that I'm tapping will be assigned that color. But if I check off contiguous, I can isolate it to only the objects that I select on that layer. Know that your fill has got a little bit more tricks up its sleeve with those two settings, which are really handy to know. Next, we have our shapes tool. So shapes might be a slept-on feature, I'm not sure, but it's cool because they're just already loaded objects, essentially. They've got a few categories here. Got comics, floral, and typographic by default. You can probably guess as a lettering artist which one is my favorite. But shapes are cool because they are objects that you can fill instantly, as long as you're on a valid layer. And it'll ask you if you want to fill it as a vector or a pixel, which is really cool. So you have that option. Much like in our selection, you can always erase, but this will just erase the color. So don't worry about, having to rearrange the orientation of the shape, which you can totally do, much like we saw with our transform tool. You can rotate it, you can move it around with your stylus. And then almost like a stamp, you can just move the shape around and fill it wherever you want, which is nice. I highly encourage you to explore the shapes tool. It's pretty cool. And I especially love the ones that have the typographic layouts. So you can set up a piece of lettering with that. Next, let's take a look at our text tool. So our text tool, relatively straightforward. We're just gonna press and hold, and you'll notice that we can do our type horizontally or vertically. And here I'm just gonna start drawing a text box. You'll see automatically your text properties will jump open And this is where you'll find your different font selections and all of that. One of the main differences between the free version of Fresco and the premium version of Fresco is definitely the font selection. You will not have access to as many fonts from Adobe Fonts, so just keep that in mind, that it is one of the limitations of having the free version of the program. So it's just like editing your fonts in any other program. You know, you can select different weights if the font has different weights. You can adjust the size. You could drag your stylus over those values to change them. You can adjust your kerning, so the spacing between the letters. You could also change them to be all caps or small caps if your font supports that. And then obviously basic things like text alignment, left alignment, center or right. And then, of course, we've seen it before. We've got that little antenna looking thing sticking out from the top of the box so that we can easily rotate. And editing the text is as simple as tapping into the box, just hitting show keyboard and birthday. So not a lot of frills, but you don't really need them. Here we've got our eyedropper tool. So dragging anywhere onto our canvas, the change in the color will be reflected in our color chip here and in our little wheel here. You'll also see the information at the top right-hand corner populate with the hue, saturation, and brightness readings. But we'll take a deeper look into the eyedropper tool when we start talking about colors a little bit later in the video. You can also place images into your work as well. You could take a picture using the camera on your device. You could select photos from your photo library. You could select files from your Files app on your iPad. You can use your Creative Cloud libraries that you have saved from other projects, or you can access Lightroom and pull your photos from there. So all really great options for incorporating photography or any other sort of resources that you have saved elsewhere and bringing them into Fresco. Next, we're going to take a look at the touch shortcut. If you're seeing that your touch shortcut isn't toggled on, you can just go to your settings. Just make sure that that little touch shortcut toggle is on. So the touch shortcut is this little button. It's like a multi-use utility tool button. And basically it transforms a lot of your different tools and gives them different functions. So let's take a look at some of the basic ones. Let's say adding some more confetti ribbons here and there. I can tap and hold and transform my brush into an eraser. And you'll see erase with brushes coming up in the right-hand corner. What that allows is for seamless creation. You can just use your other hand and erase that stroke. When you're working with vector brushes, the touch shortcut has another feature as well. Let's say I've got these intersecting, overlapping lines. When you're using vector brushes, for example, if I press and drag, I can trim off these extra lines and clean those up that way. The touch shortcut can also be used to select multiple layers. So if I press and hold, I start tapping, I can select multiple layers in my document. The touch shortcut has a lot of capabilities, to be honest, a lot more than I could cover in this video. So you can go to this question mark icon here and go to touch shortcut and explore all of them for yourself. Next, we're going to be looking at gestures. So gestures are one of the many benefits of working digitally. They allow you to speed up your workflow and do things pretty instantaneously. Let's take a look. If you find yourself with a mark that you do not wish to keep on your work. A simple 2-finger tap on the screen will undo it, and a 3-finger tap on the screen will redo it. If I want to get up close and personal with the details of my work, I can spread 2 fingers apart to zoom in and bring my fingers together to zoom out. You'll notice that as I'm doing that, I can still move the canvas around. I can even twist my fingers like this, any 2 fingers, to rotate my canvas. You'll also notice that there's like a little snap when it's straight again, and when it's in the horizontal and vertical orientation, so you'll always know that your work is straight. You'll also notice that if you're really zoomed in and you want to zoom out instantly, just a quick pinch and your work will go back to the size of your screen. If you ever need a refresh or you're not sure which gestures to use, you could always go to that question mark icon and go to View Gestures. Next, let's talk about layers. Our layers are these little square thumbnail icons on the right-hand side of our screen. This icon at the very top is what allows you to view or hide them. Layers are what keep our work separated and organized. You can use them in a lot of smart ways, so let's look at a few of them. You can simply tap and hold any of these layers to drag them up and down to reorder them. The topmost layer will be considered what's on the top layer of your work. So for example, if I put these shapes on top of this hat layer, they'll overlap them on top. But because my text layer is now on top of the shape layer, the shapes are in between those two. Now let's say that I wanted to group these. We have a few ways of grouping layers. I could use my touch shortcut, for example, do a multi-selection of my layers, and from there select this folder icon. I could also simply drag and drop the layers into each other to also create a group. If you ever have a group that you want to separate, you could simply tap the group and you'll see this menu will pop up and you can select Ungroup Layers. I do like to group my layers to try and keep things organized as I work, and you can tell that a layer is grouped because it's got like this sort of stacked look to it. It's not just a single square. It's got a couple more lines that sort of make it look like it's literally stacked on top of each other. So that's just a quick way at a glance to be able to tell if your layers are grouped or not. In addition to grouping layers, if you've grouped something and you want to then create one single layer for that group, just flattened into one layer, that's called merging. So to merge a group of layers, you can tap the group and select Merge Layers in Group, and that'll create a single layer. Alternatively, you could also hit this 3-dot icon here and select Merge Layers in Group in that way as well. Hitting this plus sign icon will create a new empty layer. So let's see what other layer types there are. This could be a clipping mask layer by hitting this icon that kind of looks like a box with a down arrow coming from it. So you just select that, and whatever layer is underneath it will be the one that receives the information that you're coloring onto. So it's a cool way of coloring as well, and sort of containing that information to only apply to the layer that's immediately underneath it. There's also all different layer properties and things that you can edit. You can copy the layer, tap again, and paste the layer. You could also tap and simply duplicate to do the same thing, but just a hair quicker. You can delete layers by hitting delete layer. You can clear the layer So just erasing the information from that layer without deleting the layer itself. You can cut the layer. So maybe I want to take it from there and paste it a little bit further down in the layer sequence. You also have the option to lock layers. So this would mean that I cannot make any edits and I cannot draw on the locked layer. To toggle the visibility of a layer, you can click this eyeball icon, simple tap. The eye with a slash means it's not visible, and also you'll see that it disappears from your canvas. And then you can just toggle it back on whenever you're ready for it to be visible again. This sort of Venn diagram looking icon is your appearances. The appearances will allow you to edit brightness and contrast, hue, saturation, and color balance. Selecting clip will make sure that whatever adjustment layer you choose will appear as a clipping mask layer by default. All of your layer actions can also be accessed through this 3-dot icon or by simply tapping the layer itself. Directly underneath your layers icon is your layer properties icon. You can go and adjust your blend modes. All of the standard ones are here. There's a lot of them. And this is also where you can adjust your layer opacity. Next, we're going to look at guides and alignment. So this little gridded icon, you can give that a tap and you'll see 4 different ribbon menus. First, we have snapping. Rotation snapping is great for when you want to make sure that you're only snapping to certain degree angles. So for example, I have 45 degrees selected. I'll enable my transform tool, rotate like we've been doing, and you'll see that it highlights blue once it reaches 45-degree increments. So it's just a way of gaining more precision with your rotating. Alignment guides are handy to have toggled. You'll see these little blue lines will pop up showing you that you're aligned with your canvas. So it shows up to the middle, vertically and horizontally. It'll show that this bounding box is now in line with the midline of the canvas. Next, we have grids. It really comes down to personal preference, but it is nice. You can adjust your grid color. You can even adjust the spacing of the grid boxes if you like. But this is obviously completely optional. In addition to graph grids, you have perspective grids. So you can set your work to go to 1, 2, or 3-point perspective. So you can adjust the kind of amount of lines for your perspective grid you wish to use. You can again adjust this color. And the cool thing is you can edit the vanishing points. So by default, it'll populate to the middle, but I could move it off the canvas, for example, or wherever I want really. Just know that you do have a lot of flexibility in the kind of perspective grids that you're using. You can also create a perspective grid from an image, a layer, or a separate document. And then one of my personal favorites, the symmetry tool. So you can toggle on symmetry and see that there are 7 different types of reflective symmetry and 6 different types of rotational symmetry. Start drawing and right away seeing exactly what this tool does. And just depending on the type that you have selected, it'll affect where your strokes appear. So cool way to add instant frames to your work. And just to experiment. Well, I've seen a lot of people create like fun florals with this. Now let's say that you have the type of symmetry that you want, but you don't have it in the correct place that you want. You can always enable move guides. And with that centerpiece, adjust. And with this green dot, allow it to let you to rotate freely as well. But if you messed it up or you want it to just go back to default, you can just hit this arrow that looks like it's leaping back to the left. That's your reset button. So you can always just go back and try again. Here is where you can leave comments and collaborate with people on this document, let's say you wanted to share it with someone for feedback or comments, you can add that here with this little speech bubble icon. Next, we're going to be talking all about color. So we've been adding color a little bit here and there, showing you the fill tool. Let's take a look even deeper. So let's say I've got my fill tool out. Everything is dictated for color by your color chip. So you're just going to select from your color wheel whatever color you want. You've also got your hue, saturation, and brightness sliders here. You also have a 3-dot icon that could change these into RGB sliders if that's your preference. The cool thing about this program in particular is that there's so many different ways that you can color. I can also use that eyedropper tool to help me fill with a color that I've already used on my canvas. I also have the option to do something called a multicolor fill. So if I go from this solid dot to this more multiple colored dot, it basically takes a snapshot of everything that was captured by that color chip. You can see it even previewed here, what exactly it's drawing from on your canvas to fill in the color chip there. So let's say I'm satisfied with that. I'm going to choose this brush, and I'm going to start drawing with multiple colors. Now, you might have noticed that when I had selected some of these other brushes, like the marker brush, that multiple color option went away. Not all brushes have the ability to do multiple colors, so sometimes you just kind of have to tap around and see which ones can have it enabled, but it's pretty cool. I like to use it to create ribbon brushes for lettering, so it's extremely interesting. But you'll also notice in your color section, you have access to a bunch of different Fresco colors and color swatches already. And a lot of those include multicolor swatches. So these are already pre-configured into the app and are ready for you to use. So I highly encourage you to check those out. You'll notice also if you have something like hard round brush selected, that this little color chip and the little icon in there kind of becomes a stamp. So if you select a brush size that's large enough and you just make a single tap, it becomes a stamp on your screen. If you ever have issues with color, you can import a photo from your library and it will generate a color palette from that image file. You can also delete the palette if you don't like it, but if you don't like that it auto-generates color palettes from images, you could always go into your settings, go into your app settings, and then turn off auto create color palette. Another tool that I really like to use for coloring is this paint inside tool. So it's more of a setting. So I have paint inside enabled. I'm on this layer. So here I'm painting inside of these letters, basically like it's a coloring book. Wherever I click on the screen to start coloring, it'll keep my strokes within that shape. So much like a coloring book, but with even more precision and control, you can color in things on your canvas. Now, this is a cool tool, but like I showed you guys before, I do prefer using a clipping mask, for example, to color, especially if I'm still testing out color palettes, because it allows me to non-destructively add color to any part of my work. Next, we're going to venture down into the bottom right-hand corner and look at our drawing aids. So similar to our shape selections, we've got drawing aids. So in the bottom right-hand corner, you have access to 4 different drawing aids. One, you have a ruler. Great for setting up grids and lines for your lettering, for example. That's my most frequent use of the ruler tool. So just drawing along either edge can create straight lines for you. You can rotate it at any angle and create pretty precise lines against the ruler wherever you happen to rotate it. Then we've got circle, square, and polygon. So the difference between these and the selection is that they can be traced around. So I can trace around the perimeter of this and then also fill it with color. This little sort of looks like a transform. When you select that, you can move it around. You can change its dimensions. You can also use the touch shortcut to scale your drawing aids from the center. So no matter which shape you choose, you can do that as you wish. And just like we saw with the polygon select tool, you can fill these. You can adjust the amount of sides. You can add a fill shape with a different stroke color if you want. Next, we're going to look at animation and motion. I love animating my work in Adobe Fresco because of how accessible and easy it is. So let's take a look. In the bottom right-hand corner, we're going to tap this icon to enable our motion settings. At the bottom, you'll see a timeline appear, and this will apply to whatever layer you have active and selected. So for me, it's my party hat that I've drawn. There's two types of ways that you can animate your work in Fresco. So the first one we're going to be looking at is frame by frame animation. We're going to start out with one frame. If I want to add a new frame, I can either press this plus sign icon to create a new empty frame, or I have the option to tap this and hit duplicate. From here, I want something to change because that's what will simulate the motion, right? So I'm going to select my transform tool here, and this little handy window will pop up and ask you, do you want to transform the selected layer and all associated motion content or just the current frame? For this, I'm going to select just frame because I want there to be a difference between my frames so that you can see the movement as it changes. So I'm going to hit transform. So let's say I rotate it a little bit. Then I'll hit done. From here, I'm going to duplicate this frame one more time. It's going to ask me again if I want to apply the motion to just one frame or to all frames. I'm going to say just to one, and then I'm going to move it again. So now I've got 3 frames with the hat in 3 different positions. So let's take a look at how that looks. I'm going to hit play all, and you can see it's moving pretty quickly, pretty erratically. So I wanted to go a bit slower, so I'm going to decrease my frames per second slider in my little settings here. And there it goes, and it's moving a little bit slower. Much better. So as you can see, frame by frame, it is changing. So with each frame, it simulates a fun little animated movement here. And we didn't even have to do that much. Let's say I wanted to do something a little bit more advanced looking. This is where path animation comes in. So we're going to select path here, and out from the right will pop out our layer properties and our motion presets. If you're an Adobe Express user, for example, a lot of these will look sort of similar because you'll see that with a simple tap, you can apply instant motion to any object that you have selected. It's kind of insane because all I did was press one button, but you'll see there's different presets here and they do any number of things. There's a lot of options. I really like this sway option here. Maybe I want to adjust the angle a little bit, how much it sways. So maybe it'll sway a little bit more. If I increase that number of times slider, I can even add multiple hats and scatter them about if I wish to do so. So this is where you really just get to tap around and have a lot of fun. I do have a separate video about motion and animation in Adobe Fresco if you want to check that out in more depth and detail. Of course, we have our settings here as well. You can make this loop, you can make it boomerang, so it'll play forward and then backward and then back again. It can play once, so it won't loop infinitely. I like to leave it on loop because usually I create GIFs and things like that with my work, so I find that to be helpful. Onion skin is great because for frame by frame animation, for example, like we had before, you'll see the color change between each frame so that you can tell a difference more distinctly and easily between each different frame that comes before and after whatever your current frame is. Of course, you can make those as visible or less opaque as you like, depending on your preference and how visible you want it to be. Once you're satisfied with your work, let's take a look at how to export and share it. In order to export your work, we're going to hit this little icon in the upper right-hand corner. It looks like an arrow shooting out of a box, and you can select a few options. We've got publish and export, we've got quick export, we've got open a copy. Remember, I mentioned that this is compatible with Adobe Illustrator because of its vector capabilities. So you could either send this to Illustrator for the iPad if you have that installed, or you could send it to your desktop as well. You can also use those sharing capabilities, like I mentioned, for collaboration on the document, or you can preview your time lapse, which is really cool. Every stroke will be recorded and you can play it back and share that on social media if you like. So let's go to publish and export. So here we've got those same options. When we select export as, this is where you can select your file type. So you've got, pretty popular file types here: PNG, JPEG, PSD, or PDF. You can also export this as a Behance project, which will integrate seamlessly onto your account. So obviously you'll use your Adobe ID for this. This is also compatible with Capture, with its pattern feature. If you've created some sort of pattern in Fresco, you can export it into Capture and further develop your pattern with its settings. You can also isolate the export of your time lapse, so it'll put things together. It'll tell you the full length of duration, and then with this slider here, you can adjust that to the length that you like. Since mine incorporates motion a bit, it will give you motion export settings if you have those enabled. So you can choose the format for that. So MP4, GIF, or PNG sequence. And as well as loops. So you can say how many times it'll loop. Whereas with GIFs, it'll obviously just loop infinitely. So let's say I want to keep this still. Save this to my device. If I already know that I just want to export it quickly to my device, I can always just click Quick Export. Under your settings menu, you can go to App Settings, where you can adjust those quick export settings. So I have mine set to quick export to JPEG, but you can have yours quick export to a different file type if you like. You'll also find time-lapse settings. You could adjust the quality depending on, the capabilities and outputs that you're looking for. You could always adjust that there. I really hope you enjoyed this Adobe Fresco for Beginners video. Share it with a friend. Leave a comment with any questions that you might have. Check out my other Adobe Fresco videos that I have on the channel. See you in the next one. Bye.